welcome you all to our first free interactive conference, which is presented on this satellite to all of you, to the 64 campuses of SUNY, as well as more than 250 LSI groups of the meta-nexus. This is a free interactive conference of the Society for the Scientific Study of Spirituality. This conference is being held the first time from our SUNY Oneonta campus. Now, the Yoga and Meditation Society, which is based in SUNY Oneonta, was started 3 years ago, a little bit more than 3 years ago. And this society had invited more than 24 speakers. And all those speakers had been able to give us scholarly as well as experiential information on this very important topic, which is science-religion dialogue. And we believed, I'm a practitioner of yoga, we believe that yoga is the wonderful model for a dialogue between science and religion, because it has been going on for the past 2,500 years. Now, the 25 speakers we brought during the past 3 years, they were interviewed like this, and their tapes are available on yoga website at SUNY Oneonta. Now, this conference is generously funded by the meta-nexus of Philadelphia as well as SUNY Oneonta campus. A lot of people have made this conference what it is today. And we are very, very happy that we have today a number of speakers who have come from outside. A lot of students have participated to make this place the way it looks today. And we are going to have a very exciting discussion here. Even though the topic of science-religion dialogue is a vast one, and today we'll be scratching just the surface of it, many more conferences like this will be happening in the future, and I hope you will do it. Today we have here Dr. Schrader, who is a distinguished teaching professor and also the chair of the philosophy department at SUNY Oneonta. He's the moderator. He'll be giving us time, and he will be introducing all the speakers, including myself. And here is Dr. Schrader, and I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Ashok. Each of the guests with us today has a distinguished pedigree with degrees, honors, awards, publications. I could spend all of their time simply telling you about them. I would much rather keep these introductions very short and let them have as long as possible to speak. Our first speaker is Dr. John Kohler, professor of philosophy at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. And Dr. Kohler is going to tell us about meditative practice in Chinese tradition. Right. Dr. Kohler?
May we have the next slide, please? Doug, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here with my distinguished colleagues to talk about meditative traditions. Next one, please. I can do that? No. Here we go. This is Lao Tzu, which means the old master, about 2,600 years ago. And he is the single most important figure in the Chinese meditative tradition. China has well-developed meditation traditions going back thousands of years. Each of its three primary ways, Taoist, Confucian, and Buddhist, developed its own meditative practices and ideas, which in turn influenced each of the other ways. And because of time constraints, my main focus will be on the Taoist meditative tradition, and then briefly on its interaction with the Buddhist meditative tradition in China. Now, in all meditative traditions, the main focus is on self-transformation, especially on removing the self-imposed limitations of the mind. In Taoism, we see this most clearly in the early masters, Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. both of whom insisted on the self-transformation needed to be in harmony with the great Tao, the fundamental way, power of reality. To be in harmony with the Tao of self-transformation requires that a person abandon resistance to change. Instead of fighting change and grieving over what's being lost, a person needs to change her emotional response so that she can experience the joy of participating in the natural processes of transformation that constitute the Tao, the inner power. In the famous story about Zhuangzi's reaction to his wife's death, we find an excellent example of a changed emotional response that is based on Taoist meditation. According to the story, when Master Hui heard that Master Zhuang's wife had died, he went to offer his condolences. But to his great surprise, he found Zhuangzi sprawling on the floor, beating out a rhythm on an overturned kettle, singing a song. Horrified, Hui remonstrated with him. "She lived with you, raised your children, grew old with you, and now has died. It's bad enough that you don't cry for her, but isn't it going too far to be lolling around, pounding a kettle and singing?" "Not at all," replied Zhuangzi. "At first, after she died, how could I, of all people, not be sad? But then I reflected on her beginning and realized that originally she was unborn. Not only was she unborn, originally she had no form. Not only did she have no form, originally she had no vital breath, no qi. Intermingling with nebulousness and blurriness, a transformation occurred, and there was form. The form was transformed, and there was birth. Now there's been another transformation, and she is dead. This is like the progression of the four seasons, from spring to summer to autumn, from winter to summer, and there she sleeps blissfully in an enormous chamber. If I were to have followed her, weeping and waiting, wailing, I think it would have been out of keeping with the way things are. So I stopped." Now this story illustrates Zhuangzi's insistence that to become free of the fear and suffering that change brings to those who cannot adapt to it, we need to broaden and enlarge our point of view. We need to free ourselves from the limitations of our own conditionings and circumstances. And as Zhuangzi stepped back and looked at his very deep sense of personal loss, it was a terrible loss for him, but he was able to see her death and his loss in a new light, from the perspective of just another change in the universal process of transformation. And it is this process of reflecting on how to adjust to change that leads Zhuangzi to emphasize that ultimate freedom is achieved through identifying with the Tao, not by fulfilling social roles and functions. The sage, in his free and easy wandering, does not impose his mental categories on things. He learns to let go of preconceived categories and earlier judgments so that he can see things as they really are right now. This requires cultivating trust in the mind's ability to spontaneously and intuitively respond to changing patterns. It means seeing and sorting things out from the perspective of the Tao. As Zhuangzi says so beautifully, just ride along with things as you let your mind wander. Entrust yourself to inevitability and thereby nourish what is central. This is the ultimate course. Now, the Taoist vision shared by both Laozi and Zhuangzi offers a view of the universe and man as a unity. Human knowledge, at its best, transcends the limits of percepts and concepts. It's direct and immediate, not being dependent on any false duality between the knowing subject and the known objects. The principles that should guide life and regulate the actions of human beings are the same principles that naturally regulate all things. Life is lived well only when people are completely in tune with the whole universe and their actions in accord with the Tao flowing through them. But the transformations required to bring oneself into harmony with the Tao require meditative practice. The Tao Te Ching clearly expresses this in chapter 10, which in Ashok's translation, here in Wisdom of the Tao Te Ching, reads as follows: Can you arrest your mind from the restless wanderings and still focus on the Tao? Can you control your vital force like an infant? Can you purify your inner vision without staining? Can you guide without ordering? Can you indulge in significant events in accordance with their natural flow? Can you gain knowledge without the help of the mind? Always creating, nourishing, non-possessing, acting without reward, and leading without controlling. This is the way of the inner power, the De. Lao Tzu also says in chapter 56, take control of your speech, shut your senses, smoothen your edges, simplify your complexity, hide your shrewdness, become part of the dusty earth, and realize the natural unity. And in order to free ourselves from intellectual and emotional limitations, Lao Tzu says, make your mind blank, still your heart. And then, going with the flow of the Tao, you can meet any challenge in life. And it was because they knew how to meditate on the Tao that Lao Tzu said, quote, the ancient sages were profound. They had subtle wisdom and deep understanding. And the path, the spiritual path that these meditative practices open up is described very beautifully by Zhuangzi, who lived about 300 years after Lao Tzu. He says, the extreme of perfect Tao is mysterious and hushed in silence. Let there be no seeing, no hearing. Embrace the spirit in stillness, and the original mind will become correct by itself. You must be still. You must be pure. Do not labor your original mind. Do not churn up your vital energy, and then you can live a long life. And when the eye does not see, the ear does not hear, and the mind does not know, then your spirit will watch over the original mind. With this original mind will come long-lasting life. Be cautious of what is inside. Block off what is outside. Then I will lead you up above the great clarity, the source of perfect yang. I will guide you through the dark and mysterious gate to the source of the perfect yin. Okay. Now, this advice is captured in some Taoist pictures that probably have existed for about 2,000 years, and they were incorporated into Zen Buddhist, in China, Chan Buddhist practice. Buddhism came to China about 1,800 years ago, about 1,600 years ago, merged to some extent with the Taoist tradition, and they enriched each other. And we have here these wonderful pictures. In the pasture of the world, I endlessly push aside the tall grasses in search of the bull, following unnamed rivers, lost upon the interpenetrating paths of distant mountains, my strength failing, my vitality exhausted. I cannot find the bull. I only hear the locusts chirping through the forest at night. And what we have here, let's see, may I have this? What we have here is a description of someone who is out of sync, out of harmony, who's constrained, constricted, limited, and beginning to be aware there's something wrong with how I'm living. I need to look. I need to look to find a way. So he's seeking a path. The ox represents the Tao. The seeker is the individual who thinks that she is completely separate from the Tao. But then, After some seeking, some awareness, the tracks are found. Innumerable footprints has he seen in the forest and along the water's edge. Over yonder, does he see the trampled grass? Even the deepest gorges of the topmost mountains can't hide this ox's nose, which reaches right to heaven. He's beginning to discover that there's something within him, something he can find. Maybe he's found a master, a Zhuangzi or a Lao Tzu. And then, he begins to get real experience, a first glimpse. And how beautifully a nightingale warbles on a twig, the sun shines on undulating willows. The Tao is present everywhere if we can see it. It's in us and it's all things, in all things. There stands the ox. Where could he hide? That splendid head, those stately horns, what artist could portray them? And then, actually experiencing, realize, catching, getting hold of the Tao, being in touch with it. And he must tightly grasp the rope, not let it go. The ox still has unhealthy tendencies. This is the mind that needs to be disciplined. This is meditation required. Because otherwise, the mind runs here, it runs there. And the mind sees the Tao as running away. So the discipline is required to tame this ox, the mind. So he must hold the nose rope tight. We sit in our meditative position. We let go of all the noise and chatter of our minds. We let an original mind begin to come into play. And then eventually, this mind becomes gentle. It follows its own way into the depth of reality. And then we're at home. We can ride the ox home. We are a unity with the Tao. We've experienced this. So riding free as air, he buoyantly comes home through evening mist in wide straw hat and cape. Wherever he may go, he creates a fresh breeze, while in his heart profound tranquility prevails. And this ox requires not a blade of grass. This is your own original mind, which your own meditative practice has freed and allowed you to become one with. You now go with the flow of the Tao. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, John. It is now my pleasure to introduce Swami Alan Ajaya. Dr. Ajaya is a practicing psychotherapist in Madison, Wisconsin. His presentation today is entitled Contemplative Practice and Psychotherapy in Tantric Yoga. Dr. Ajaya.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. It's a big subject to cover all these three, contemplative practice, psychotherapy, and Tantra. Let's see if we can do it succinctly. The word Tantra is often translated as weaving, and sometimes is translated as expansion. It refers to the way, Tantra refers to the way that the components of the world are woven together, or how they expand into the phenomenal world that we live in. It's comparable to modern science in that science studies the way in which the material world components, atoms, molecules, and so on, are woven together and create our phenomenal world. Tantra studies the way what we call the inner world, such components as spirit, soul, archetypes, essential qualities, are woven together to establish the world we live in. So it's really a science of our inner being. Tantra also explores the way in which polarities create our experience and how to transcend those polarities. And the core polarity in Tantra is that of the male, the masculine, and the feminine, which in the Indian tradition are referred to as Shiva and Shakti. The male principle refers to consciousness, withdrawal from the world. Shiva is represented as meditating on a mountain in India, withdrawn from the world. He's represented as dancing in a way that his dance creates the dissolution of the world. And the feminine force is the principle of energy, of embodiment, the life force of the world. And it's said that Shiva, the male principle without the feminine principle, is called Shava. If you've done yoga, you know the word Shavasana, which is the corpse pose. So the masculine without the feminine is like a corpse. And we're in a situation these days in our contemporary world where there's been an overemphasis of the masculine and a neglect of the feminine life force. And we see the effects and the destructiveness of that imbalance. So Tantra is about the imbalance and the weaving together of the feminine and the masculine, contributing together. Now, many religious and spiritual traditions in the world also tend to neglect the feminine or the embodied aspect of existence and tend to assert that spirituality is somehow leaving this physical world, going to some higher, quote, realm of consciousness. In fact, the word contemplation, which we're here talking about today, itself suggests a withdrawal from our activities in the world, sitting quietly, considering, thinking about some important concern. And a person who's known as a contemplative is someone who's a monk, who's withdrawn from the world, perhaps living in a monastery. Meditation is something that we consider, we go quietly, we close our eyes, we withdraw from the world in order to meditate. And spirituality has also been compartmentalized as something that's attained when we transcend this worldly existence. We think of spiritual activities as things like prayer, chanting, doing service to others. There are special categories that we give to aspects of life, and we call those spiritual. I'm saying this because Tantra challenges these notions of separation. In Tantra, contemplation occurs in the midst of our everyday activities. There's no need to go off and be separate. There's no need to attain anything. And I think we can have an interesting discussion about this question of, is there a path? Is there something to be attained, something to be achieved? Or is the way of being in an open, what we call enlightened, in samadhi, is that really something we attain through a path, or is it what's already present? And is it a matter more of discovering, opening to what's already here and now, and letting go of all attempts to be on a path or to reach somewhere, to get somewhere other than where we already are? Now, in contemplation, at its core, there's one central question in the way of contemplation, and that's the question, who am I? Or we could say it in another way. I like to phrase it as, what is this? What is all this that we find ourselves in? But usually it's the question, who am I? Behind all other questions is this question. Now, those who think about contemplation initially, if they don't understand it, think of this as an intellectual question, a mental, conceptual question. I'm going to understand by reading scriptures or by through my beliefs, who am I really? Oh, I'm not this person, I'm divine, I'm a spiritual person, and so on. But contemplation, I can't read that. 10 minutes, okay. So contemplation is not really an intellectual process. As we understand it, as we explore it, it's not to understand mentally, oh, I'm a divine being, I'm one with everything. That doesn't do us any good in our day-to-day life. We're still left with the attitudes and approaches and the identity that we carry forth in everyday life. So what we need, rather, than an intellectual is contemplating in a way that really brings us directly into who I'm taking myself to be in this moment. So contemplation, rather than being mental, is an experiential process of sensing into, feeling into, how am I being, what's my attitude in this moment. If I'm being angry in this moment, rather than thinking, oh, but I'm really a spiritual being, I shouldn't be angry, and trying to be different than I am, contemplation is the experience of sensing into the truth of how I'm being right now. I am being angry, and letting myself be in that experience free of beliefs and biases of whether I should or shouldn't be this, so I can really open into what does this feel like? What is this experience like? And in being open to what is, paradoxically, what is free to move on. When we resist the experience of the moment, that experience stays with us. If I resist my anger and try to go according to the belief that I'm a good Buddhist and I shouldn't be angry, then that attitude stays in us. Whatever we resist stays within us. But when we truly open to experiencing how it is in the moment and really feel into it, then that way of being is free to release. It's free to move into the Tao, into the change, because change is always going on, as we just heard. And by being free of my trying to be in this way or that way, and being open to explore how it is, I allow myself to open to the Tao. And really, I would say that's it. That's when we speak of samadhi, when we speak of enlightenment, it's really about simply being open to what is and letting us be carried through into what is and allowing that to flow through us. And it doesn't take any trying to get anywhere. It's just attending to the truth of the moment, attending to it with an openness. It's the integration of truth and love. And what I mean by love is what Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard, just having positive regard for how it is in the moment. And it's this interaction of truth and love which is represented, I believe, in the cross, the vertical being truth, like the Christian cross, and the horizontal being love. And it's represented in the Jewish Star of David with the vertical triangle integrated with the triangle facing downward. We find that same triangle at the heart of the Hindu tradition as the integration of the Shiva principle and the Shakti principle, the male and the female principle. So this way of contemplation, rather than being a path, is really a way of what we in contemporary society refer to as deconstructionism. It's a deconstructing of the structures that we are holding in ourselves, not through an intellectual process, but by simply sensing into what that structure is, being open to it, and then on its own it begins to dissolve. And in this way, contemplation is the same, I would say, as psychotherapy. Psychotherapy, as it was originally developed, was developed by what I call revelationaries. Men like Carl Jung and Wilhelm Reich and many others, a whole list we could give of wonderful creative people who broke the structures, the confinement of the knowledge of the time, and really gave us revelationary understandings of ourselves. These days, much of psychotherapy has been confined to trying to self-improvement or trying to be better at this or that, and rather than uncovering and dealing with the essential question, who am I? But at its core, as it's practiced at its fundamental best, psychotherapy is also this exploration of who am I, and opening up with the client to help the client explore what am I experiencing in this moment, and being present to it without biases and judgment, So it's really the same as this contemplative practice, only it's with another person. In contemplation, traditionally it's been done along with another person. The teacher was not somebody who came and lectured, but it was more of a Socratic process where the guide would ask questions of the student. So that's how contemplation works. So in that way too, it's similar to the process of psychotherapy. Most of our education systems and religious systems focus on acquiring answers and acquiring knowledge. And the more answers and the more knowledge a person has, the more highly regarded that person is. But there's little recognition for the fact that our answers provide a confinement. Our beliefs, our knowledge actually confines us and puts us in a cage rather than being open to new wisdom and new knowledge. There have been studies of this process, for example, in science, how the beliefs in science have, what science has found in the past have kept the scientists going forward from being open to explore, that they've been confined by those beliefs. So contemplation, in contrast to that, is not about finding answers. It's about remaining in the question and in the questioning, being open to continually questioning, what is my experience right now? And never identifying with a belief or an answer that comes as a result, because as we heard about the Tao, there's change going on all the time. So if in the moment I question, what am I feeling? I'm angry. Even to define it as being angry, closes us down to the full experience of what's here right now. So contemplation is a continual letting go of what we find, of what structure, what answers we're finding in the moment, and being open to the question in a continual process. In this being open to the question, we remain wondering, what is this? What is this occurring now? Not mentally, but feeling into, what is this? Oh, here's a tightness in my body. Here's an openness. And as we are with that, that begins to release. So being in this wondering allows us to live in wonder. This is about living in wonder in every moment. In every moment it's possible to be in wonder of what is this? Who am I in terms of feeling? What is this? And to be in that kind of awe and exploration. So to me, that's what the heart and essence of contemplation is. And in this wonder, this takes us deeper and deeper. We begin perhaps with feeling a tension in our body, feeling anxious. And as we're with that, that begins to release. And then we begin to feel something deeper comes forward. And that something deeper may begin to be a flow of energy, a flow of delight. It may be a quality of essence, such as a quality of pure strength, not strength over somebody, but the essence of strength. And as we continue to explore deeper into that and just sense into that and let that take us and be in wonder with that, that structure within us begins to dissolve, and we go deeper into beingness that's even free of those qualities. And then we begin to explore being, just being without any structure, and we begin to experience ourselves as pure being. We begin to experience not an idea or a concept of what spirituality or what enlightenment is, but we actually know through and through by being that experience of pure being. So thank you very much. I hope that gives us at least a brief introduction to the integration of these three aspects of being.
Thank you, Alan. Our exploration of contemplative practice and healing continues now, moving from Taoism and Tantrism to Native American traditions. Our next speaker is Dr. Gregory Fields. Dr. Fields is professor of philosophy at Southern Illinois University Edwardsville, and his presentation is entitled Song and Healing on the Pacific Northwest Coast. Dr.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you, John. Hello. It's an honor to be here, and I want to thank each and every one for attending, and thank our hosts for Ashok and all the work he has done, and really appreciate the campus hosting us so kindly, and thank all the ones who are participating online across lands and waters. My topic today is an American Indian contemplative tradition. I'm going to talk particularly about the medicine songs of the Pacific Northwest coast. And the region that we're looking at here is around the Seattle, Washington area and up into the San Juan Islands of British Columbia. Seattle's down here, and you've got Victoria, BC, and some very beautiful islands here, the San Juans. And these are Coast Salish people that live in this region. Many tribes. You would be familiar with Chief Seattle's tribe, the Duwamish. That's one of a couple dozen Coast Salish tribes in that region. I want to say a few words about the fact that American Indian traditions, when they're considered from the standpoint of scholarship, comes with quite a lot of controversy. And this is understandable because of the historical destruction of indigenous American lives and lifeways because of misappropriation of traditional knowledge. And there are different viewpoints among different Native communities and individuals about appropriate limits and methods for scholarly inquiry into American Indian traditions. Some communities and individuals hold that their traditions should be kept entirely private in order to protect them from misappropriation, from distortion, from dilution. And other communities and persons take a position of more collaboration between Native and non-Native persons, utilizing resources like universities, museums, wonderful new electronic technologies we have to record material on audio and video for purposes like language preservation, preservation of stories and songs and teachings. And I wanted to note that the tradition I'm going to be talking about today, called the Sisiwis tradition, the families that have carried this medicine tradition since ancient times and to the present day hold the position that collaboration respectfully done is a good thing for the preservation of knowledge and teachings, and that which has to be kept private in the communities where this knowledge and these practices originated can and should be kept private. But there's quite a lot of knowledge that is available to anyone who has an open heart and mind to learn more about it. And so the families that have done teaching and recording and publishing of some of their songs and traditional knowledge in this tradition take the position that knowledge is a good thing, and rather than having distortion and dilution and misappropriation, let us put our minds together and see what we can learn from these traditions that can help us care for ourselves, care for one another, care for our earth. As you go through the San Juans, you see all these little islands. Some are big islands with a few thousand people living on them, and some are just little uninhabited islands. It's a wonderful trip across from, say, Seattle to Victoria. It takes a couple of hours on a boat. And the ancient people and Indian people still today in the region build canoes, both seafaring canoes and river-going canoes. What a magnificent example of science in ancient times, that people could harvest these enormous cedar trees, which they did with songs and prayers and a request to the cedar to sacrifice to make this craft for human transport with songs of thanks. And they did a lot of calculation and technological work in order to make these magnificent canoes. And they're also products of artfulness. So science and art are integrated in making a watercraft like this. Knowledge and a strong sense of the sacred. I'd like to open my remarks about the Sisiwas tradition in the traditional way with a song or a chant. And this chant says, respect all the people, respect the earth, hold the sacred breath, maintain the sacred breath, hold the light, hold the prayers. Thank you, Creator. Siel wa eveni mostimu. Siel wa eveni klin. I heichka si Celsium Shost ha Shost nitliat Shost nitli win Tekel well goes. So just a quick word about the people and the region. Northwest Coast is the last region to be reached by settlers, missionaries, government officials, traders in the United States. And with a pre-contact population of about 180,000 people, as many as 80,000 perished owing to largely to diseases like smallpox and influenza. The number of Coast Salish people today enrolled at the different tribal communities and reservations in the region is a little bit under 30,000 persons. And about the languages, Canada's got about 30 or 50 native languages, and in the US we've got about 165 left of about the 350 when Columbus discovered the continent here. And consider that only 20% of US native languages have more than 1,000 speakers. These Salish languages may have the different dialects 100 speakers, or only 10, or only one that we know of in the case of the Samish language. Government boarding schools, the imposition of a certain kind of knowledge on native people resulted in a lot of loss of language and culture, and a lot of suffering for native people, but a lot of native people report a positive experience in the boarding schools. This is Tulalip Reservation, and there are songs that accompany the bringing of the salmon in this beer here, not like a Budweiser, but B-I-E-R, beer made of cedar is the first salmon, and songs and prayers are given in thanks for this animal providing food for the people. And here in the longhouse at Tulalip, there's a ceremony conducted to give thanks and ask the salmon to keep returning to help the people. The longhouses of the Northwest Coast and of the native people in our region here, and I want to offer respect to those peoples and ancestors and spirits. These longhouses are another magnificent example of scientific knowledge, architecture, where people had to work with the elements of nature, harvest the cedar, create the planks and the roofing materials, and do the calculations and raise these tremendous cedar beams. You can see the sheer size of those. A lot of cooperation between science and spirit. Science, Latin, scientia, knowledge. we think of science in the Anglo-European tradition in a very particular way. It has to do with empirical confirmation, and it has to do with a material world or a natural world that's considered in many ways separate from the world of so-called spirit. And one thing we learn in looking at indigenous understandings, theories of knowledge, ways of living, is a holism where science and spirit are very closely integrated. So you see the top portions of the longhouse there, that's for the smoke to be able to come up where there are big fires in there. This is one of a larger one of the smokehouses. Here's an old photo of one. And there's another at the Swinomish Reservation, a smaller one, and I was just there last month. There's Tulalip and the orca, the killer whale. A few of the people, I want to say this about science and religion. There is an influence on the way we think about culture and knowledge and spirituality that's influenced by the paradigm of science itself. And Darwinian thought, I believe, has given people the viewpoint, or at least in earlier scholarship, that there's a progression of humanity from more primal culture into the higher European way of knowing and being. And I think now we're starting to realize the fact that different cultures have different ways of knowing and being that do not represent a hierarchy of progress. This is the late Mr. Fred Jameson, one of the teachers of the CCUS medicine of the Lummi Nation in Washington. Mr. Raymond Moses from Tulalip with his drum. Again, I want to mention artwork as a form of contemplative practice, to create the art, to enjoy the art in science, in the science of preparing the paints and the hides and all the work that goes into this is a contemplative process where one is in meditation and prayer and uses songs for that. Mr. Johnny Moses, I met at University of Hawaii in the early 90s, and I've studied with him and worked with his family for about 15 years. Wistemani is his native name, walking medicine robe. He's of the Nuchanalth or Nootka and Tulalip nations, one of the Salish. And the tradition I'm talking to you about is Siwis, the sacred breath. Si is sacred and Wis is the breath. So sacred breath. Respect yourself and treat yourself sacred. You'll respect all things, know all things around you is sacred. Big teaching there. Some people heal with singing, drumming, dancing. Songs can change the way you think and feel, can open the mind and the heart to more forms of knowledge. Medicine songs carry healing and life force. Some are for healing, but many songs are medicine songs, even if they're not used in a healing ceremony or for a direct healing purpose. They carry life force for the well-being of the earth and living things. I want you to hear a few of these songs. We're going to just hear this Song of the Fall now while you read a little bit about the teaching. I hope we will. Let's wait and see if we do. This song has the tone of the autumn. It's contemplative. Can you hear it louder? Listen quietly to the
Oh,
Lovely. Like the Hindu ragas, which are played only at certain times of the day, these medicine songs, many of them in the Northwest Coast, are only for a particular season. It would be sacrilegious to sing them out of season. They carry the energy of that season. This mic here? Okay, so here's a gathering in the fall, and people have a floor altar with the sacred elements, the earth, air, fire, and water. And here's Mr. Moses in a winter longhouse, and I'd like you to hear a winter song real briefly, just to appreciate the energy and power this song has in the winter season, which is the contemplative season in the Northwest Coast. About the winter song, it's a very strong, energetic song, and this is an example of what I call a religious therapeutic. That's the name of my book, Religious Therapeutics. And here's a spiritual practice. You're walking in the snow, and most of us have a heaviness in our mind, body, or spirit, a thought, a worry, an ailment. And here's a practice. Throw that thought on the snow wind and watch the snow disperse and let that thought go. Very practical, simple technique. The Petal of the Flower song, appreciate the deer toe rattles and how much they sound like the rain in springtime. I'm going to have a summer song played now from the Clallam people, a thank you song. And summer is the season of gathering foods, of earning for the livelihood one needs to get through the winter. In the Northwest Coast, it's rainy in the winter, so that's the season of ceremony. Summer's for celebration. I'm just going to click through a few slides here and show you some ceremonies where songs are sung. These are Shaker gentlemen. It's a syncretic tradition mixed with Christianity. There's me at the Shaker house. And the bells are used in the Shaker tradition. A very intense meditative instrument to help people focus in their prayers. Prayer altar, facing the prayer altar to pray. And I wish I could tell you more about Dr. Vi Hilbert. My time is up, but I look forward to Ashok's remarks and a little more as we continue to discuss together. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Greg. Throwing your thoughts on the snow wind, for those of us here in upstate New York, that is a wonderful, wonderful image. The final speaker on our panel is a gentleman you met earlier. Dr. Ashok Malhotra is Distinguished Teaching Professor of Philosophy here at SUNY Oneonta. The title of his presentation is Yoga as a Model of Dialogue Between Science and Religion.
Thank you. wonderful to be here. I'm delighted that all of you are here. I'm delighted that we have a big audience all over the world at all the, hopefully, 64 SUNY campuses. My topic is dialogue between science and religion, and how yoga is a model. In yoga, the dialogue has been going on for the past 2,500 years. Now, it's an interesting topic. When we were thinking about the topic itself, at that point, we thought that the dialogue between science and religion can be started at many different levels. First, religious people can start the dialogue among themselves. First, let them start talking to each other. All the major religions, minor religions. On the other hand, the scientists, many different kinds of scientists are there, and they can start with the dialogue and then bring them together, like this stage here and here. Instead of clashing with each other, like some people said, when the religious people meet the scientists, the first relationship is that of conflict. They call each other enemies. The second kind of relationship which is possible is you mind your own business as scientists, we'll mind our own business as people in religion. Let's be independent of each other. Then we'll not come into your territory. The third, which I would like to see happening, is what I call dialogue between science and religion. And the final kind of connection, which will be wonderful, where a scientist and a religious person, they come and give each other a hug. They may not give a kiss, but okay, at least give a hug, be intimate. Okay, that will be the wonderful thing. An intimate kind of discussion, dialogue, the territories. Some other merge together. Now, these four things which I mentioned, those four things are discussed in a wonderful book by Ian Barber. He calls it When Science Meets Religion, whether they will meet as friends, whether they will meet as enemies, whether they will go their separate ways. It's a wonderful book. I recommend that you should, look at it. But once I read that book, then I thought about, yoga. This system of yoga I have been practicing for the past 35 years. This has been a very important part of my life. I got yoga training in India, and then as I started teaching here at SUNY Oneonta, I have been teaching hundreds of people, I should say thousands of students have gone through the yoga practice with me. So I was thinking that why are scientists and religious people are arguing with each other, or there's a conflict, when this has been already going on for 2,500 years. So I will some other indulge with you on that topic. But before we start talking about that, I want to mention that let's situate yoga. Now the word yoga originated, who knows, before 500 BC. But the first system of yoga, which is considered to be the original yoga, was created by a sage philosopher whose name was Patanjali, almost 500 BC. The ideas were there before that, but he put all these ideas together. And his goal was something very interesting, because those days, one of our major way of dealing with philosophy, religion, science, all that was put together. And we find that Hinduism was the major religion of that time, but it's a very complex religion. It's also a religion which gave rise to three major religions of the world. One is Buddhism, which emphasized compassion. It gave rise to Jainism, which emphasized sanctity of life and connectedness of all existence and being totally nonviolent. Third, Sikhism, which emphasized service to humanity, through which you can express and experience spirituality. But it also gave us the fourth thing, very important, and that is the system of yoga. And the system of yoga was presented as incorporating science, religion, philosophy to make it as a way of life. And there is a mantra, a sound symbol, or it is a saying which is chanted every morning by the Hindus, and I'll just say it. That will, in a way, summarize for us the entire the philosophy of yoga itself and how yoga becomes philosophy, science, religion, and a blend of these three disciplines. This mantra is called Gayatri Mantra, and it's said every morning. You can say it other times too, but morning time is the best one. It goes this way: Om Bhu Bhuva Swah Tat Svitu Vare Niyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yo Naha Prachodayat. 16 words, and the mystery of the universe is captured here. And it says, before anything was, there was ultimate reality, Brahman, ultimate consciousness. This ultimate consciousness wanted to express itself, make itself concrete, so it produced the sound Om, Big Bang. And once that cosmic sound was produced, it spread itself to create the earth, to create our solar system, to create the galaxies, to create the whole universe. And on this earth, the same sound created human beings and all the creatures. And in each one of these creatures, there is this ultimate sound, Om, that resides inside. That's the divine spark. That's the life force inside us. And why are we born on this earth? The mantra says to realize this divine spark. We are given this divine spark, we forget that this divine spark is actually not there. So what yoga tried to capture is, it believes that we are born on this earth to realize this spark. And in the yoga system, they came up with set of physical exercises, set of breathing exercises, and a set of meditation exercises. They believe that the divine spark which resides inside, which is the life force, can be expressed fully, completely, if we form good habits of the body, good habits of the heart, and good habits of the mind. So they came up with 64,000 different physical postures which will help you form good habits of the body and make the body age less, if you can do all those. They came up with a number of breathing exercises called pranayama. These breathing exercises will help you take control of your breathing, take control of the way your lungs are able to get this prana, this life force, and be able to influence your emotions. And that way, at will, you can create the kinds of emotions you want to have. And that's what the breathing exercises do. And the third, which is forming good habits of the mind, these were the meditative exercises where you take control of your mind. So sometimes yoga is regarded as the art of sculpting the body, sculpting the heart, and sculpting the mind. What the yoga philosophers thought about was that the ultimate reality, which is somehow expressed through completely, or in a certain ways through the sound Om, resides inside. By forming these good habits of the body, good habits of the heart, good habits of the mind, you can express this. Body becomes the vehicle. It becomes the tool through which it can express itself. Now, people have practiced these. There's only one person who was able to practice and perfect those 64,000 different postures, was able to do all these wonderful breathing exercises and meditation exercises. He's regarded as God Shiva, the Shiva Nataraja, and his body is looked upon as a perfect dancer. His one foot is down, another foot is up in the air, one hand holding a torch, a light like the Statue of Liberty, other holding a musical instrument called damru, and one hand facing the people out there, another one pointing to the foot. That is, if you're a dancer, you can free yourself from the gravitational pull. But at the same time, if you meditate, if you're able to do the physical postures and do the breathing exercises, follow the system of yoga well, you can even beat death. You can become eternal, like God Shiva had become eternal. Of all the gods and goddesses in pantheon, Shiva lives in one of the caves on the top of the Himalayas, 16,000 feet. If you want to walk up there, go ahead. But it's interesting that of all the human beings, one became that. So that's the ideal yogi there. Now, if we actually look at it, initially this whole system of yoga was kept at the level of some of the people who went and sat down with their teachers in the Himalayas, and they learned from them, and it took 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of real changing your diet, changing your lifestyle, and going through the yogic practice to finally become that kind of person which we call the ageless person, or a person whose mind becomes timeless, like the Shiva. That was the model. Some of the people, practitioners, thought that yoga should be for everybody. It's not just for the people of India. And we find that a lot of these yogic practitioners made claims that when you do yoga, you develop these unusual powers. You can move objects from a distance. You can extend my time from 15 to 20 minutes. I can do it today, all right, but I'm not that good yet. So you can do all kinds of very interesting things. So from 1959 onwards up to today, 2007, number of researchers thought that we can actually look at the claims made by these yogis, what they can do for human beings. So from 1959 to 1995, we find that the research which was done on the influence of yoga on human personality was done by just a few people randomly. It was not done systematically. But from 1995 to 2007, it's amazing what's going on with yoga. People are practicing, and there are 4 different things which actually influenced it. First, a number of big universities like Harvard, MIT, Toronto University, Oxford University, they started funding research in alternative therapies like acupuncture, Tai Chi, yoga, and so forth. So that gave it a boost. Secondly, the Dalai Lama of Tibet, who is a wonderful, generous human being, he gave the challenge to the neurologist and psychotherapist. And he said, you have been talking about this MRI. You can map the brain waves. So I will offer you my greatest monks and go. They will sit down and they will go in a meditative state. You go and map it in technicolors. Let's see what you can accomplish. And that, in a way, pumped up the spirit of the scientists. Let's do it, because Dalai Lama is a wonderful figure. Then we found some very, very interesting things which happened. Time magazine, if you look at it, a lot of issues that Time magazines have been devoted. We see that this was done in 2003. This was done in 2007. They're devoted to yoga and meditation. So we find that most recently they're finding out when they're experimenting, they find that if you spend even 2 to 5 minutes each day just concentrating on your breathing, it relaxes you. If you concentrate on a mantra, which is a sound symbol like so hum or hum so, that somehow takes away the hold of our intellectual mind, which some other guides us so that we can live in this practical world. But once the hold is gone, another state of mind takes over. There was Benson and Wallace, 2 scientists, did some experiments with transcendental meditation. And he found that by using a mantra, they found that these meditators, like all of you, if you did that, you not only were able to have your waking state, your which we call wakefulness state, dreaming state, or dreamless. There was a 4th state of consciousness that they called hypermetabolic state, which was unlike any of the other 3 states. And once these, they were able to look at this state, they found that they could map this state, and this state is that of relaxation. It's unlike the state which we have ordinarily of fight and flight when something goes wrong. And we find that most recently, and I'll just quickly say the last few things, that they found that Time magazine mentioned that if you do meditation, yoga on a regular basis, it's an antidote to stress. It reshapes the brain. It relaxes you. You accept the present. It heightens the immune system. It deals with difficult situations in a calm way. There's less activity in the frontal cortex where reasoning takes place. There's activity in the parietal lobe, which comes down and it slows down the alpha waves, and a person is able to get away from the fight-flight response to the calm. Now, most recently, I read that some of the Russian cosmonauts are being trained in breathing exercises so that they can slow down the consumption of oxygen and the elimination of carbon dioxide, so that on a long flight to Mars or others, they don't have to send that many canisters of oxygen with them. And it's wonderful. And I find personally that yoga and meditation has helped me. I'm 105 years old. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ashok. Well, that concludes the formal presentations of our teleconference. We have advertised this as a dialogue, and a dialogue, of course, requires people to speak to one another. For those of you who, listening to what Dr. Malhotra has said, have forgotten what Dr. Fields has said, or forgotten what Dr. Ajaya or Dr. Kohler has said, let me start with some very, very short, quick things about what I noticed from each one of those talks, and then we'll open it to questions. And I will, I promise you, be brief. John talked about Schwanza's mourning for his wife, or rather his refusal to mourn for his wife, because she had moved from that which was formless to that which had form and that which was formless. To have returned to the state that she had before she was his wife is not a cause for sadness, is not a reason for mourning, and so he moved on. Dr. Kohler talked about the universe and man as a unity, that we have a false dichotomy between the knower and the known. And I think that as we talk about a dialogue between science and religion, that's a very, very important point to pay attention to. The whole notion of our distinction between what is objective or what is subjective, what is real knowledge versus what is just an opinion or a feeling, of course, depends upon that dichotomy between knower and known. And if we break that down, as Taoism certainly tries to do, then we will change the dialogue in substantial ways. Dr. Ajaya spoke of Tantra as a weaving, particularly a weaving together of the parts of our inner life so as to form the world of our experiences. He reminded us of two powers or two components of that inner life. Shiva, the male component, and Shakti, the female component, much as John had mentioned yin and yang in the Chinese tradition previously, that we have overemphasized, largely here in the West, but in many other cultural traditions as well, the male principle, but not paid enough attention to that female principle. And if we're truly to be whole, if we're truly to have an inner health as well as an outer health, that we need to find ways of bringing those two principles into greater balance. And Dr. Fields perhaps reminded us that ours is not the only culture that there ever has been, and in fact that there are other cultures who have perhaps done a much better job of keeping those principles in balance. He talked about a cooperation between science and spirituality, that knowledge and spirituality don't have to be separate, that you can build a canoe and still pray to the cedar that you are chopping down, thanking it for giving its life to help make this canoe, and realizing that the lives of everyone who will travel in that canoe depend upon the tree that has been growing before their grandparents were born. And finally, Dr. Malhotra has reminded us about the fundamental unity of the universe, as Om, as the sound from which not only we derive our being, but the very galaxies themselves come into being. of yoga as a way of sculpting not simply the body, but the mind and the heart as well. So with that said, we will open up first to the audience, our studio audience here, and then to those people from more distant regions. Questions? You want to wait for the mic? Thank you, Bob.
Why don't you tell your name first and then?
Okay, Bob Vetter, and my question is actually for everyone on the panel. If we look at science, if we come from a perspective originally of looking at science and religion as distinctively separate in the Western world, and when we look at contemplative practice as unifying science and religion, what are the implications for Western thought in general and philosophy in particular? What do we need to change about how we look at things from the perspective of Westerners in a Western world?
John, you want to be first responding on this?
That's a wonderful question and a very difficult question. But I think, in part, we have to pay attention to what Alan was talking about. I think in terms of letting go, which is always the first step of any contemplative practice, is the letting go. But how do we do that? How do we in the West, who have been acculturated into grabbing onto and holding on dearly, creating like chains that will carry us forward into new thoughts? And that always separates everything. So the practice of letting go. But where do we get there? I don't know.
Well, it seems to me that in many ways science is actually leading the way these days, especially physics, you know, where and our beliefs about ourselves have tended to follow physics for a while. For a long time, when physics was more Newtonian oriented, we had a mechanical view of the universe. And now modern physics is challenging the whole idea of an observer and an object to be observed as if they are really independent, and is connecting back to the teachings, many of the ancient teachings, and validating them. So I think religion as we know it, contemporary religion that's established in institutions and organizations, may be behind the curve in this, and difficult to let go of beliefs and institutionalized ways of thinking. But the new religion, if I can use that term, it's been overused so much, but the potential is that science and the ancient religions can bring a new way of being that is not so much the mind of the person as being in our minds, observing the universe, and the idea that we have in Western society as though human beings are the ones who are going to regulate and control and be the engineers over nature, but to be more respectful and responsive to nature. I think there's a lot of potential. And even the Christian religions these days, I'm just amazed that even some of the fundamentalists are beginning to respect nature and turning around to say that we need to be aware of our environment. And I feel like there's a bigger force behind all this, that we're drawn into a larger understanding, and even those conservative religious people are beginning to be influenced by that.
Respectful of and responsive to nature. Dr. Fields, that sounds like a perfect lead-in for you.
Thank you. Science and religion can and should both aim for well-being of persons and human communities and of the earth. When the tsunami struck Southeast Asia and South Asia, it would have been possible, I believe, if the planning and the technology and the intent had been integrated to warn so many people that very few would have perished. But that was not in place. And I think the technology exists, and from spirituality we can gather the fellow feeling and the moral obligation to help one another. I think science and religion have to cooperate in order to solve the problems that face humanity and the planet. And when I say religion, I don't mean any particular sect or denomination, but spiritual awareness about the sacredness of life, the sacredness of other persons, human and non-human persons, the sacredness of nature, their connectedness, their dependence on one another. I was trying to buy a Pizza Hut pizza at the airport in Cleveland, and we were all grumpy with our delayed flights and our hunger, and I was watching the people elbow each other for the pizza, and I thought, what would happen if there were a gunman here and we needed each other to survive? And in that case, I think the behavior would have changed very radically. So when nature confronts us with these catastrophes, here's an occasion where our scientific knowledge, informed by a spiritual intent to use the power of human intelligence in a good way to help one another and to help nature, can cooperate.
Dr. Malhotra.
Yeah, I have a number of points which I can mention here, but I'll take care of two of them. First, when I mentioned the sound Om as the expression, the first cosmic vibration out of which everything is formed, I was thinking about the most recent research which is presented in physics by Brian Greene, who talks about string theory. And he says that the universe which you see around you, the material universe, made of matter, and then we say, okay, behind it are, this matter is made up of molecules and atoms, and beyond that of little particles. And he says, no, even beyond that, there's nothing but strings of vibrations. And the strings of vibration make up, and how the rhythm works there, that's the way new things are formed and created. So that some other brought to my mind the sound of Om, that we are coming together. If the physicists come up with more defense of the string theory, maybe they can see a dialogue happening there, because their paradigm or their conceptual structure with which they are trying to explain the universe might be very, very similar, even though up to this point they followed separate territories. That's one point. The second point which I want to mention is I mentioned that the popularity of yoga, meditation, contemplative practice in the West is enhanced by not only the Hollywood people like or Al Gore doing it, or we have Deepak Chopra helping Demi Moore and others. That's one. But it is coming from big names like the Dalai Lama, who said that contemplative practice has been going on for centuries among the Buddhist monks. Now we have scientific tools which can be brought to measure what goes on when you are in a meditative state. So neuroscientists, neurologists, psychologists, psychotherapists, medical doctors, they're all jumping in to see if what the meditators have been saying, the meditation does bring a change in one's personality, in one's body, one's heart, or it does help you to live a more meaningful, significant life. Can we measure it? And it seems like a lot of experiments have been going on. And I think they are pointing the direction where dialogue is taking place. Maybe that will change the mindset of people.
It all sounds very optimistic, I must say. Let me be skeptic here. Yes, there was relativity, general, special relativity, chaos theory, string theory. And some 25 years ago, David Bohm wrote a wonderful book, Wholeness in the Implicate Order, profound implications. But I don't see that this has changed very much what's happening among the people in the world. I don't see that there's less dichotomy. I don't see that we're coming closer to a sense of unity with the fundamental forces of nature.
Yeah.
So,
just to answer that, they started meta-nexus 5 years ago, and meta means beyond, and nexus means all these different disciplines. Meta-nexus means bringing these disciplines which you had never talked to each other. So you're bringing it, and money was granted by Templeton Foundation, to start this kind of dialogue between scientists and humanists and people in the religion. And I find that a lot of people are really working at a scholarly level. Now the question is whether it will simmer down to the level of ordinary people.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's going to take time. It may take 10 years, 15 years. But I think there are more people talking to each other than they were not talking to each other.
It's good.
Okay, so I'm just saying something is going on.
And I think it's important that we remind ourselves that these questions are not new, that we have in fact been wrestling with them for thousands of years, and we will continue to wrestle with them for thousands of years. We don't propose to find answers within the next 45 minutes. I'm glad you mentioned string theory, though, because it's very important to see relationships between our science, our music, and our spirituality. The individual who coined the term philosophy, Pythagoras, is perhaps best known to most students in terms of the Pythagorean theorem in mathematics. He is also the individual who devised the harmonic scale, dividing the various vibrations of the universe into 8 discrete repeating patterns. And there are problems with that. As you listen to the sitar music of Rup Verma later, part of what you will hear are the spaces in between those nice discrete steps. It's also important to remember that Pythagoras was the leader of a spiritual community, a monastery on the island of Samos, and was in fact eventually stoned to death by the people there. So these tensions are very, very old. Let's move on to another question, though, if we can.
Can I say something
Oh, yes,
about this?
yes, oh, sure. Sorry.
About this question of optimism and pessimism. It seems to me that there's another polarity beyond the one I talked about earlier. There's a fundamental polarity between a tendency toward wanting to open to what's new, toward revelation, and the other side of that, when we open to a new revelation, that revelation then becomes encapsulated in a belief. It becomes what was a new experience now becomes, oh, now this leads me to believe this. And the beliefs are what creates the resistance.
Yes.
And there's always this back and forth between opening to what's new and the resistance that then creates. And I think there are different periods of time where the resistance is more strong, the entrenchment in beliefs, and other times where the world is coming to new experiences. And I think we're in a time now of throwing off through the internet. There's a throwing off of authority, not relying on religious authorities to have religious experience. There's more opening to direct experience. And so there's a lot a lot being revealed. Things that were kept hidden in the religions are now available to everybody. And this is causing a reaction. This is causing the fundamentalist reaction to that. And we're seeing that struggle very much intensified. And we're very much in the midst of it. And I think there are different times where there's more entrenchment in the beliefs and more openness. And we're just in the middle, we're living in the middle of that. And what I tried to present, one aspect of it was the more that we can learn and teach to one another, not standing in beliefs, but being open to question, to being open in the question. When lightning rods were first invented in this, and people began putting lightning rods, the church opposed it, having lightning rods anywhere, and, because it was trying to control what was a natural, fires were just a natural expression. So that's what happens when we get caught up in our fundamental beliefs and not open to letting ourselves be in the question of what is this occurring?
Let's have more questions.
Excellent.
Questions?
Next question.
Yes.
Where does morality come into play with this spirituality? Like, if like you're being more open to independent spirituality, then where does the morality come from?
Can I answer that immediately? In the yoga system, we have the ultimate goal is to perfect the body, perfect the heart, perfect the mind, so that your body becomes a perfect vehicle for the expression of that spirit. But how do you actually perfect it? What are those habits of the body? And that's where morality comes in. And they come up with 10 basic principles of morality. And they call it, 5 of them are called yama, another 5 niyama. Yama means non-violence. You have to be totally non-violent. Also believe in sanctity of life. You have to speak the truth, be honest, satya. And then you have to inculcate the principle or habit of non-craving for pleasure, having control on it, non-aggressiveness, then non-covetousness, taking away other people's stuff. Those 5 principles, then they have to be nourished by 5 positive principles, which are, one is called santosh, that you have to feel contentment. We tell people not to be content. The more discontent people are, they'll go and do shopping at Walmart or JCPenney and they'll run around. Maybe that will satisfy them. To learn to be content, then it's socha. Socha means personal hygiene, what kind of foods you eat, what kind of drinks you have, what kinds of emotions you take inside. Then self-discipline, self-study, and then finally surrender of your ego. So these 10 become the moral principles. You have to perfect them before you can start doing the physical postures or breathing exercises or meditation exercises. So that is actually the pillars, those 10 pillars of the edifice of creating this ageless body and timeless mind.
I would say in accord with what Ashok just said, but in some way at a really very basic level, morality depends upon our being able to feel each other's hurt, each other's pain, so we can respond to it. I need to walk in your shoes. Then, because in myself, I know what hurts and I don't want it, and when I have this empathy, then I know what hurts you and I don't want to hurt you. So to the extent that these contemplative practices can overcome the divisions between us, these boundaries, and we have a sense of our sharedness of existence, I think we have the very basis of morality, the respect for each other, the recognition, the need, in fact, it's felt as a need to help each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I very much appreciate your response to that, and I think historically we've relied on morality coming down from authority. You know, this is how you should be, and then these principles can be taken that way, but they don't have to be. And it seems to me what's more important is our direct experience. So if we do injury, if we don't follow this principle, even if we don't know about it, what is the consequences if we injure somebody? If we really listen to ourselves, if we feel what it's like inside, we can learn often from our mistakes, but that's the way we learn. So if I do hurt somebody, if I do injury, not only what does that do to them, but how does that feel in me? If I steal something, well, maybe I get that object, but what does it feel like to me to have to go and take something rather than to be open to what's freely given? So I would emphasize that we need to learn from our own experience and find our own morality through really contemplating and being open to how is that in me. And I think in that process we'll come to these 10 principles because they're an expression of the truth of how we're affected by following the principle of truth or non-truth and so on.
Okay,
You
I'd
want
like
to chime in on that one?
Great question. Looking at indigenous American traditions and taking the idea of health and healing, I think there's an idea there to inform our understanding and practice concerning morality. Health and healing concern well-being, non-injury, but also thriving, functioning well, harmony, order, not chaos and destruction. And I think if we looked at any world tradition, any ethical system that philosophy has offered us from the traditions of the world, ethics based not in religion, but my students like to talk about, you know, the kind spiritual atheist who gives the child the ice cream cone just out of the kindness of his heart. Does there have to be some spiritual impetus to do that based in a religion? Well, an American Indian view of this, and I speak particularly about the Northwest because that's what I know about, health and healing can be considered as an aim and as a test. Shall I use the styrofoam paper cups for the gathering? Well, it would be convenient and cheap, but how long will it take those to biodegrade? The amount of consumption that I do as a relatively affluent American, how many planet Earths would it take if everyone consumed the amount of housing and gasoline and all the things I do with my disposable income? More Earths than we have. Can I understand that in terms of health and healing? Yeah, that directly means that there are persons in want, and therefore I should not overconsume against their requirements, nor should I consume in such a way that I damage the planet's ability to keep a healthful functioning.
Thank you. Yeah, the question of morality is actually a delightful question because most of us, when we think of it, think of a system of rules and regulations, thou shalts and thou shalt nots. And those tend to constrain us. They tend to put parameters and definitional boundaries around who we are and what we should do and so on. And contemplative traditions are almost always deconstructive in the way that Alan has talked about, of breaking down those boundaries. Now, that's not to say that you don't have to be extraordinarily disciplined in order to practice meditation, or that there aren't rules that go with that. But the idea is not simply to conform to the rules, but to rather to use those rules and constraints in order to create the space to open up, break down the boundaries, particularly boundaries between self and other, between who you are and the world, not simply the physical world, but the social world in which you are engaged. And when that happens, the right behavior comes spontaneously, not because it's simply complying with a set of rules.
Yeah.
Sure.
Another way to consider this is in terms of systems theory. You know, initially we're thinking of our self as a separate system, and my concern, this relates to what you're saying too. Then we begin to think of family as my system. My family should be prosperous, but we don't necessarily consider others. But as we expand our consciousness, and this is also what spiritual opening is about, this is what coming into realizing who we really are is about, that we're not just my person, we're not just my family, it's not just my country, it's just not even just my human beings, but it's animal life, that we expand our understanding of who we are, what the bigger the system that we take in, until we realize that we are everything. As Meister Eckhart said, it's not I and God relating to each other, but I am that divine being. And I'm not exclusively in that divine being. You're not. We all are that. And so as our awareness expands and we realize, our system expands to realize that we are not separate from anything. We actually know that. It's not just a mental thought. Then how can we do harm? Do I want to do harm to my finger? It just naturally, I wouldn't do that.
No, another question.
I've heard it thrown, the idea thrown around a lot, mostly from you, Swami, that you think it's more beneficial to not identify with one belief because they confine us. Do you, when you say that, do you mean that in reference to not identifying with extremes, like political extremes and so forth, or do you mean that it's dangerous to affiliate yourself with only, do you mean that to the extent that it's even dangerous to affiliate yourself with only one religion and things like that, or both?
Not only religious beliefs, but any belief. For example, I had a client today, I was speaking to a therapy client, and I was saying, well, what are you feeling? And she was saying, well, I feel I feel anxious, I feel afraid. And even that, I was questioning, well, when you say that, you automatically go to that category, but would you let go of that idea that you're anxious and afraid and really feel into and experience what's going on, free of the idea that what I'm feeling is afraid, free of that belief from past experiences. So I'm not just talking about believing in a religion, but any belief that we have. There's a wonderful, I'll just say that if I can say this quickly, there's a wonderful book of short stories by Sherwood Anderson called Winesburg, Ohio. At the beginning of that story, he says, once a time there were all these truths floating around in the world, and people began to, a person would latch onto a truth, like the truth of fidelity, and they would begin to live by that truth. And when they lived by that truth, they became a caricature. They became distorted because that became the one truth that they lived life according to, and they ignored all the other possibilities. So I'm saying any belief of any sort limits us from being open to the wonder of what is this in the moment, and even the knowledge. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, the Lord says, everyone comes to me by surrender. It's through surrender. And surrendering what's dear to you. And most of us who are intellectual, what's dear to us is our knowledge and our beliefs. So even that has to be surrendered to reach divine consciousness. Am I responding to you?
I have a little different take on this,
Okay.
and a lot of sympathy with this question, because in order for us to act and to live in this world, we must act. In order to act, we have to believe. So we cannot get free of beliefs entirely. We might, and you can't practice multiple religions at the same time. And if you think you can live in multiple belief systems at the same time, we're going to need some help. I would need a lot of help if I tried to do that. And maybe some drugs I'd need. It's very, very difficult. But I think the trick is to act, to hold to your beliefs that you need in order to act, which help you make sense of your life and of the world, but hold them only as tightly as necessary. That seems to me the trick. So sometimes we can let go a little bit, and then we can broaden, and it becomes larger. But we can't just dump them. It's not possible to live that way. Yeah. So to get this really wonderful, supreme, divine consciousness, let's go there slowly, I think. Yeah.
So I'd like to comment
Yeah,
on that.
please do.
I'm understanding the possible implication to not holding to beliefs to be that if one is committed to a religious tradition, one should be committed to that tradition and that tradition alone. And John just said there could be a lot of strife or discontinuity in a person who tried to practice more than one religion. And I'd like to give an alternate view. The tradition that I talked about, the Sisiwis tradition, has a lot of syncretism with the Christian tradition, and that makes sense with the missionaries coming and bringing the teachings of Jesus, which a lot of the Indian people recognized as genuine spiritual teachings that were not incompatible with their own way of understanding the spirit and the good. Others rejected Christianity and stayed with the old medicine ways. Some converted to Christianity and abandoned the old medicine ways. I wrote about Black Elk in the Black Elk Reader, who was a traditional medicine man in the Lakota way, who became a Roman Catholic. And a lot of people have debated whether he just did that because he knew that the macro culture was going to take over, and if you can't beat them, join them. Our people may be safer as Christians than if they try to follow the old medicine ways. Others have said, no, he really gave up the old medicine ways. He was a Christian 100%, and whatever looked like native tradition was merely his cultural style of expressing his spirituality. And the argument that I make in that chapter in the Black Elk Reader is that Black Elk was a profound enough theologian and spiritual person to recognize the compatibility of the old medicine ways with the new Christian teaching. Now, I'm not advocating that native traditions should adopt Christianity, and I'm not advocating that they shouldn't. In fact, as I said, we've got indigenous people who are Christian only, who are in the old medicine ways only, who are both, and some who are neither. That's not a value judgment, it's a fact. But I think in our contemporary time, we have a lot more faith in interfaith, or a lot more involvement in interfaith kinds of inquiry and interdisciplinary ones as we do here. What do the different traditions have to offer to illuminate the issues that face us?
My question is that we want to know if some people from outside are calling us here and they have questions. Do you have any kind of connection there? Could you find it out? Whether we have questions coming from outside? Yeah.
Can I respond in the meantime?
No.
Okay.
No questions
Okay,
yet?
okay.
Okay.
So I want to respond to your point about taking it slowly. So if you hear me saying you should drop all your beliefs, then I'm not speaking very clearly, because that would be another belief that I'm presenting, right?
Yeah.
So you'd be just following a new belief. What I'm really trying to say is to explore and look into what am I believing now? How am I sort of structuring my experiences now? What am I identifying? What am I believing? And being in a loving, accepting way of that, so that that's being contained by a loving you, and that belief will tend to dissolve. And it is a slow process. It doesn't. We don't all, but it tends to dissolve and open us to the direct experience. So I'm not implying give up your religion, but go to the heart of your spiritual tradition, not the beliefs about it, but the revelations that brought forward that tradition will begin to come to you through not being focused on the ideas about it.
Like many spiritual traditions, Zen Buddhism tries to replicate itself generation after generation with stories, tales about what has happened previously. And I think two are particularly instructive in this case. One Zen master said that before he studied Zen, mountains were mountains and waters were waters. And then, as he became embroiled in the study of Zen, mountains were no longer mountains and waters were no longer waters. But once he'd achieved enlightenment, mountains were mountains and waters were waters. And another Zen master wrote a commentary saying, the most wonderful thing about a mountain is that it's so much like a mountain. The second story, and then I'll come back to an interpretation of it, is a young man who had been at the monastery for a very long period of time and was beginning to think, maybe I'm not cut out for this. I'm just not going to reach any spiritual enlightenment here. And he managed to get an audience with his Roshi, his teacher. They were walking alongside the riverbank, and the young man talking about how he was thinking this and he was thinking that, and he just couldn't figure it out. Was there any hope for him? And the Roshi said, do you hear the murmuring of the brook? And the young monk stopped and said, yes. He said, then there is hope. We approach the world with conceptual structures, mountains, rivers, brooks, sounds, and so on. Uncritically, we don't examine those things. We just take them as they are, and we don't understand them. We don't interact with them. We don't understand how we are part of that mountain, or we are part of that river, or it a part of us. We can pursue the philosophy, the science, the spiritual study, and so on, to the point that we seem to have totally deconstructed the mountain, totally deconstructed the river, but then it becomes an environment in which we can't seem to find our way. We don't have, as John so aptly put it, beliefs on which we could act. And so we need to come back to some place where we have, as it were, mountains and rivers. But the coming back, the attitude that we have at that point is just so radically different from what we had going in that it's appropriate to speak of it as a spiritual enlightenment.
More questions? Do we have time for more questions? Brittany? One more question.
One more question. Anyone?
While you're thinking of your question, let me comment about the relationship between Taoism and science. in China. Joseph Needham did a wonderful 5-volume work, Science and Civilization in China, and he demonstrated to all of us that much of Chinese science grew out of Taoism. Both this sense that the opposing forces, the yin and the yang, both flow from an inner unity, the Tao. And this Tao is an energy. It's constantly transforming. And all of the things in the universe, and we too, transform in according with this. And to understand who we are and what the world is that we live in, we need to study the transformations of the Tao through the agencies of the male and the female, the yin and the yang that you talked about.
I just want to mention before our time is over that that's one of the main reasons behind the contemplative practice in each religion or each tradition. There is time which you spend on yourself. Most of us spend time on wrong kinds of things. We meditate on money, meditate on promotion, meditate on grade. But you don't spend time where you try to undo all this. Let go, as John said. Let go of all this. Just be with yourself and take a little inward journey. And as you go inside, you'll find there are images, there are beliefs, there's knowledge, there are ideas. Undo them, clean up. Like the Dalai Lama said, our real mind is like the blue sky. And that's the real. That's that spark within us. But as a few clouds show up and you think the sky is clouded, and then the sky is completely covered by clouds, and we say, oh, there is no such thing as sky. And there could be thunder and lightning and rain and floods, but then these clouds disappear and the blue sky comes back. That's what our original nature is. So through contemplation, through meditative practice, we try to start where we are, with all these clouds, with all this turbulence, with all this agitation, and slowly we dig deeper and deeper and go into that blue sky, that pure nature, which is called the Buddha nature, which may be called the divine spark, which may be called the spark which we got from the sound Om, which may be the chi residing inside. And that's what meditation teaches us. And that's what helps us to undo these trappings, all these constraints which have happened to us. And that's the whole point of bringing these scholars here, so they can talk to us about contemplative practice from various traditions, from Chinese tradition. There are 1.3 billion people who might believe in that Taoism or more. And there are people from India, 1.1 billion, who believe in the yoga practice, and all over the world. And there is Native American tradition, and then psychotherapy, and all this is coming together. So time for us is to contemplate and spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes each day. Reflect, have time for yourself. The rest of the world can run around and do its thing, but you need time for yourself. And that's what actually the goal of yoga is. Come back and be empowered.
We have one question here if we have time for it.
Do we? Yes. Here, all the way here. Yeah.
How do you convince somebody that who's a science-based thinker that they need to meditate on something beyond that?
Well, scientists are meditating. They are reflecting. They have picked a topic and they work on it. You don't have to convince them. Just tell them what they're doing is meditation.
I understand, but anything beyond what they work on and what is logical?
You know, answer that.
Nice, easy question. You handle that great.
Every individual has his or her own medicine or spiritual power, and I think for some it's to think in that scientific way. I don't need to convince him or her to think in a contemplative way. Med, in the Proto-Indo-European language that's the grandmother of our Indian and European languages, the verb med means to take proper measures. And from that word we get the word meditation, we get the word medicine. We're taking proper measures toward some important aim to solve a problem, to have more well-being. Medicine in the native traditions is about spiritual force, life force, goodness, health. That's at least a meeting ground with the scientist and the spiritual person to use human intelligence for inquiry. Science itself, I would ask you to think about this as your scientific illumination increases. It's a mystical experience in the joy of the inquiry, the wonderment, the awe that drives us to get more information, and the pragmatic need to get more information, develop theories, develop technologies that will solve problems. And there's a joy in that. And some would say that's a form of spiritual experience and knowledge. It's a kind of medicine in the native sense of spiritual force.
Thank you. I think we are running short of time. We're following our time limit. Before we start with another kind of cosmic vibration, which will be presented through Indian contemplative music, I want to thank a number of different people, and a few of them include first Metanexus Institute of Philadelphia, which offered us this grant 3 years ago, and because of that grant, we also got a matching grant from the president of SUNY Oneonta. These two grants helped us to have this kind of conference, to invite more than 25 different speakers from all over the world. And we had 2 medical doctors who came here, 2 physicists, we had psychotherapists, we had musicians, we had practitioners. Even one gentleman came all the way from Himalayas to show us how to breathe properly. So I want to thank Metanexus, SUNY College at Oneonta, and all the panelists who are here who gave their generous time. But above all, I want to thank all these wonderful students from SUNY Oneonta who offered their free compassionate service, along with the people who work at our Instructional Resource Center, who created this beautiful scenery, this wonderful atmosphere, this wonderful environment where this kind of panel could take place. And I really greet you all and salute you for doing such a wonderful job. And above all, the idea came from both Dave DC, who is the production manager of IRC, and also from Mark Hine. Those 2 people have been wonderful with their staff. They are able to inspire all these students. We thank SUNY College at Oneonta for providing all these wonderful facilities and all the panelists. And now we go into contemplative music, which is going to be presented by Mr. Roop Verma and Mrs. Tracy Verma. Mr. Roop Verma is a well-known, renowned maestro, musician, who had learned from 2 great musical geniuses, Ravi Shankar, who taught George Harrison, and also from Ali Akbar Khan. And now we start with contemplative music, and here we have Mr. Verma.
Thank you, Shilji. Is it on?
Is it on?
Thank you for having us. It's wonderful to hear your wonderful thoughts and having this event together. I'd like to just make a addition to what you were just saying towards the end of your talk about emptying the mind. And someone asked my teacher, what's the difference between prayer and meditation? The master said, in prayer, you are talking and God is listening. And in meditation, God is talking and you shut up. You listen. In short, meditation is not new to us, because the science of awareness has been there since the beginning of the time. People were very aware. In fact, they were more aware in the ancient times. We have sacrificed that awareness as the time passed, and we have become less and less aware because we are surrounded by so many other things. So our attention is always divided. And it is the interconnectedness of life that is the purpose of meditation, so we can enter into that space, that pure space that we are talking. That is Between you and I, there is a space. This is not the emptiness. In yoga, we recognize this is the fullness. They call it the fullness. And it is full of what? It is full of awareness. It is consciousness. It is energy. And through meditation, we connect. We become aware of this phenomena, this infinite energy. We are born in different cultures. We born in different countries. We grow up differently with different value system, eat different kind of food, wear different kind of clothes. But one thing is common to all, and that is the resonance. We all carry our own resonance, and that resonance is our essence that we cannot change. No matter what kind of clothes you put on, we can never change that. And that resonance is the key factor how we can connect with the resonance of the universe. In universe, you were talking about string theory. That is my theory. I've been working on string for a long time. And you mentioned, Dr. Sridhar mentioned about Pythagoras. I consider him as my ancestor. So these things are known by the ancient people for a long, long time. And thank you for inviting me. And it's a privilege to present this music to you. And as at lunchtime, we were talking about my tradition, where I grew up. And I was grown up I was raised in a old school. And in old school, they always believed that all sounds were taken from the nature. And these natural sounds were translated through musical expressions. And for a long time, for many, many centuries, the music was confined to the temples only, until 10th or 11th century, when the Mughals and Persians, they started to enter the country. Then music was brought to the courts of the kings and princes. So the old music was designed for our inner harmony, our inner healing, so that we can connect with that resonance that is all the time surrounding us. And most of the time we are not aware of that. And to raise that awareness is the purpose of this music. People sometimes say, "Oh, I'm not aware of this." You ask them a question, they say, "I don't know." How do they know that they don't know? They are aware that they don't know. So awareness is never absent. Who tells them that they don't know? That means they are aware all the time. So that awareness is never absent. We have to become aware of that awareness. That's the object of meditation. So I will shut up now and play with music. The music, thank you. The music is for a different time of the day. As you were mentioning, music has to be for a different time of the day. Now this is almost, that clock is wrong. So it's about 6 o'clock, and music for this time of the day. So thank you all. Lovely to have you here. There is nothing to understand in this music, by the way. It is not intellectual. It is to transcend the intellect. It is to go beyond that. So don't try to understand any phrases or any familiar tune that might appear to your mind. So go beyond that. Let it stay as a backdrop, and on that backdrop, see what is going on within you. Thank you. going to play more?
Yeah, a couple more minutes. Play something for us.
How many minutes?
5.
5 minutes, okay. Yeah. Okay.
This is a raga form which symbolizes the inner search.
Well, once again, I want to thank all our panelists, John, Alan, Doug Schrader, and Greg, for coming all the way here to Oneonta to make this place a wonderful vehicle for a dialogue between science and religion by using their basic disciplines, their own traditions, which they felt like talking about. But at the same time, I want to thank Roop Verma and Tracy Verma for sending these wonderful vibrations, which are the vibrations of peace, harmony, connectedness, and going deeper into yourself to find it out that this is one life we are sure of. And there are 4 lines which I remember as a kid, but as a student, how life to be lived, and they became part of my life. And they were said by Longfellow, the poet from America. He said, our ingress into this world was naked and bare. Our progress through this world was worry and care. Our egress from this world, nobody knows where. But if you do well here, you will do well there. And I think he has sent those wonderful vibrations. And I must thank all of you present here as an audience, and all of you who are watching us, wherever you are. Keep that peacefulness, that connectedness, that we are all here to do something very special, something positive, and we're going to do it. And I hope this conference helped us out. But at the same time, I want to thank again the Meta-Nexus, who gave us the grant, as well as Suni Onianta, President and his staff, as well as all the people who are involved in making this possible through IRC Instructional Resource Center, and especially the students who have been wonderful helpers in all these 3 years. And thanks go to our wonderful Dave Giese and Mark Hine and Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you all.
That's great. Good job.